Hello, hello. Welcome to the Self-Consciousness Podcast. This is Jennifer Way, intuitive consultant, and your hostess with the mostest, of course. I'm so happy that you're here listening today. We have a very special guest. Her name is Ash Riley, and she just rocks my world. I came across her information through my friend, Samantha Cagman. Ashley is what you can call a modern-day mystic. She's a shadow worker, a spiritual development mentor and writer. She's an advocate for science-based, socially responsible, trauma-informed spirituality without diluting the magic of mysticism. Her information is so needed right now in the world because there's so much that's just in the spiritual field that's just fucking with people. So tune in, see what comes up for you as we discuss all of these kinds of topics and themes, and I'll see you inside. I want to welcome you to the podcast, Ashley. So do you want to go by Ash? What?
Yeah, Ash is good.
Okay. So, hey, Ash, thank you so much for joining me on the Self-Consciousness Podcast. And I'm just so thrilled to talk to you. And I was just reading up on your bio, and one of my favorite things that I wrote, did I just say your bio or my bio? Because
You said
my
your
brain.
bio as my
Okay,
bio.
good. Okay, good. Because my brain hasn't been working very well. Um, was that your?
We're still in retro shade. It's totally accepted.
Oh, that's right. Um, I am an Atlantean priest named Subadaba. So that's no, I'm just kidding. I love your bio, and I love the sort of way that you introduce yourself to people. Um, I love where you come from, and the reason I got in touch with you to be on this podcast is because of your authenticity in the social media space. And we both know that it is just not a space for authenticity. It's a little bit too much of branding and oversharing and, marketing, and a lot of shaming going on. So I just want to talk to you a little bit about kind of when your sort of what you started to put out there, when you realized that you really just wanted to help people kind of sort through all this spiritual BS that we see everywhere.
From day one.
Love it.
Um so I started all this. I didn't start my own blog or anything like that immediately, but I started in spirituality back in 2011. So it's been 10 years,
Wow.
And one of the um I started out in this other like spiritual group. The whole reason I even got into this was because I found this blog of a woman who was talking to her dead son through a
Are you talking about channeling Eric?
I am talking about channeling Eric.
Holy shit. That's how I started too, but go ahead.
Well, I created the Channeling Eric Facebook group.
How do I not know this? Oh
Um,
my God. This
but
is
so
okay. Blowing my
my
mind.
whole my whole experience with that group was just that it was completely and totally unbalanced, ungrounded. Um, there were a lot of fear-based, just crazy things going on in there.
Yeah.
And I was just sort of like this person who has always been very practical and grounded and a little bit skeptical and like very balanced in how I approach things. And I was just like, you guys, this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So I put in a lot of time in that group trying to keep it grounded and balanced. And eventually I was like, I keep answering the same questions over and over and over again. So why don't I just create a blog where I can push people to a link and I don't have to keep repeating myself?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I did. And that's how it happened. But like my goal really from day one was to just dispel a lot of the really fear-based kind of stuff that people were passing around in the spiritual community. And from there, it sort of naturally evolved into like spiritual abuse and that kind of stuff, mainly because I was witnessing that in that group.
Yeah. Oh my God.
And
Yeah, I've witnessed the same thing. Go ahead.
so it's kind of always been a thing. Really through the whole like, how long have I had this thing? 2014 and it's 2021
Wow.
now. So what, 6 years?
Yeah, 7 years. No. Yeah, 7 years. Almost 7 years.
So yeah, it's been there from day one. I haven't come at it so directly until January of this year.
Yeah.
It was more so of you know, if you're seeing this stuff, it's probably not cool. And it was more of a side narrative to a lot of the other stuff that I was talking about, which was healing and that kind of thing. But in in 2020, when the whole QAnon thing started happening,
Yeah.
I knew that was going to be a problem a long time before anybody else knew that was a problem.
You
And
are psychic.
who knew?
You
And,
did. No, I'm kidding.
and so I was trying to like put out messaging that sort of like counteracted some of that. And it just kept building and building and building. And I kept seeing other people not saying anything about it and totally, and seeing, you know, people in positions of power in the spiritual community not saying anything about it or directly supporting it.
Yeah.
And then when the attack on the Capitol happened, I was just like, that's it. Like, gloves off now.
Yeah.
we cannot keep doing this.
Yeah.
And I knew that, you know, all of this was tied together and it all contributed to that event. And there's a myriad of different things and dynamics going on within the spiritual community that affect different groups of people, but all of it is coming from this same, you know, pile of sparkly bullshit.
Oh my God. First of all, I'm like, I'm still like stuck on this whole. So for anyone listening, there is a YouTube channel called Channeling Eric. Channeling Eric was actually my first foray into this as well, back like in 2015. So just a year after you. But
Well,
channeling.
I was
Oh,
in
go ahead.
Channeling Eric I left Channeling Eric around 2015.
Ah. Okay.
But I came into it around 2011-ish.
Oh wow. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I was coming in at it like from a different time. I'm sure that like so much had changed. But essentially Channeling Eric is basically an interview style show where a mother talks to her son through a medium. And I think for me, it was just like I had grown up always kind of being like, that's bullshit, like I never really understood any of that stuff, but I just kind of allowed my curiosity to get the best of me, and I just kind of fell into it so hard. I do love Eric, and I do love his mom, Elise, and like I love Jamie Butler and like Kim Babcock, and I think I kind of fell off after them, but I saw what you're talking about with the group, but on the Facebook group, and I definitely felt it getting very sticky and very like icky, and a lot of projection and a lot of just kind of people drowning all over each other. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and I think that's kind of been why I stayed away from this kind of stuff for so long is because, I didn't want to be seen as one of those crazy new age people or those crazy new age woo woo people. Until I realized that there's actually this aspect of spiritual development and it's completely personal. And but moving through the last couple of years, and especially like you said, like last year, I mean, I had been hearing some teachers and psychics say, they were referencing QAnon and they were referencing this sort of double faction, this two factions of existence and the power play between like the financial people and the pedophiles, and that what we're seeing is just drama, but it's all hidden, and then just watching it explode, like you said, was like, wait, what? Like this is really bad. And a lot of things that people say, it's just this sort of field is so unregulated, and people really are turning to you or anyone who works in the field, or gives advice or whatever, to give them a pill. And it's like, no, this is a thing you got to do. I'm just here to kind of share my experiences with it. But yeah.
Yeah, and something that I've said before is, there is no spiritual authority, and that is both the beauty and the madness of it.
Yeah.
Um, it gives us this sort of freedom to figure out who we are on our own terms, but at the same time, there is nobody there to regulate the bullshit,
Yeah.
and a lot of people get hurt because of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's the biggest thing that's talked. There's a lot of things that are talked about in the spiritual field, but one of the sort of things that I try to push as well is just for people to develop their own discernment. And it's always like, and I feel like you're the same way. It's like, don't listen to me. Like, don't take my word for it. That's not, it's not my responsibility to like convince you of anything. It's if you're interested in kind of going deeper and doing the shadow work, then you know that's on you. But so how would you really describe shadow work, kind of for people who don't really know or understand what that is?
Um, I would describe it as um, exploring your subconscious programming
Mm.
and deconstructing that subconscious programming, and then rebuilding that programming from a more conscious standpoint.
Yeah. Right on. Fuck.
And that entire process has a lot of byproducts, which includes psychic development, it includes healing, um, and it includes completely changing the way that you look at and approach life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if you are you on Clubhouse?
No.
Okay, that's probably a good thing. It's really scary there. No. I've been talking about this a lot on like with friends, and here even Clubhouse is basically a new form of social media that's audio only.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think I've heard of that, and that's probably why I'm not on it.
Yeah. It's it's scary because it is the first time a social media format is so vibrationally intimate, um, in a new way, which it sounds weird because it's basically like you're just listening to people's like to conference calls with like a bunch of people on there, or you're kind of like coming to see a speaker or whatever. But that sort of interaction, there's a real infiltration of a ton of sort of like marketing, like how to win at spirituality. I mean, it's like your worst nightmare probably.
Yeah, I
But
don't like
there's
people, so I mean, there's a reason why I'm on Instagram, and I literally never post videos and
oh
never
yeah.
post photos of myself, and I never talk to anyone because
Love it.
I just prefer the written word.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's what you do. You're a writer.
Yeah, definitely,
Yeah.
100%.
I mean, I do feel like you're a really generous communicator. Like I feel like a lot of the work that you put out there, especially this dictionary that you're putting together. This is amazing. So anyone who's listening, if you go to inmysacredspace.com, so it's just the words inmysacredspace.com, you'll find that Ash has put together a library of all the spiritual terms you could ever imagine. And the fact that you're doing this for people, it's beautiful. Like it's super generous and it's super important. Um, do you work with people one on one, not for readings, but more for like mentorship or things like that?
I have in the past. Um, I took a long break between 2017 and really up until about January of this year, while my life fell apart. And so I stopped doing work, and I even stopped posting for about a full year. So I just wasn't in a place where I could deal with helping other people. I was too busy, healing myself. Um, and I really, when the pandemic happened last spring, like I sort of came out of retirement after about a year of silence, and I was like, okay, this is kind of what we're here for. So let me pitch in and do what I can. But I still wasn't pushing myself too hard, just because there's a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety going on in the world in general, but
Yeah.
still also in my personal life. And then really up until January of this year, so that's almost a year as that went on, I was just posting maybe like once a month or something like that. And then when January hit, I was just like all of a sudden ready to go.
Yeah.
Like, okay, this has to happen now. So at that point, I took on 4 people into sort of a mentorship circle. It's not something that I'm charging for at the moment, and it's just the 4 of us, and I'm really kind of just exploring it to see what it is and where it goes. It's an idea that I had again back in 2017, but I just was not in a place in my life where I could really implement it yet. And one morning in January, I woke up and I was like, you know what? I think I'm ready to do this now. And I posted it to Instagram, and I sent out an email to my email list, and I took in some applications, and I picked 4 people, and we're in the midst of it right now.
That's awesome.
And I'm kind of hoping that I'll figure out some kind of structure to it and what I want it to look like, and then eventually maybe try to figure out how I can open this up to more people.
Yeah.
So in soon.
I mean, in the way, it's like I try to explain this to a lot of people. It's like you can't force yourself into being productive and doing shit. Like sometimes you need to take a couple of years off, stepping away. Like there's a lot of healing that, you know, we have to kind of undergo before we come back out into the world. I mean, it's all for a good reason, and the timing was really right. I know a lot of people that the last 2-3 years was that for them. It was that for me as well. Like horrible, like worst 3 years of my life, you know?
It really was globally, like starting in
Yeah.
2016, there was this mass collective sort of like stripping away of a lot of things in people's lives. And then just like healing crisis after healing crisis after
Yeah.
healing crisis on a personal level. And then it built up to this like sort of global and societal level in 2020.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I feel like so many of us who had been kind of in our little sort of bunkers for for those couple of years, like once COVID hit, we're like, oh, okay. Now everyone else is gonna have to experience this
Right.
and like sit with their shit.
And as soon as COVID hit, like I knew, like I was like, this is what we've been preparing for.
Yeah.
And I've said this for years, but I feel like a lot of us who sort of like came online to spirituality around 2012,
Yeah.
um, did so because we were going to have to be ready to help people in this time frame.
Yeah. Absolutely. I always felt like I guess like the last 5-6 years, it always The best way I can kind of describe it is like, you know how in cartoons or like Tom and Jerry, when one of them is running and then they need to slow down and you see them kind of like starting to move back a little and the rug is like bunching up before they're about to hit the wall.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? That's kind of what I felt like we were doing for those years. And then boom, we hit the wall. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's so fucking bizarre. I think the other thing, it's like, I know that at the beginning of my spiritual journey, I was very much seeing people who were, I mean, telling me that I had these severe traumas from memories that I had been hiding from when I was like 3. And then telling me that like spirit told them I needed to like, pay for 5 more sessions, like in the same breath. And leaving feeling like so manipulated and so like freaked out, and then having to learn kind of that process of discernment for myself, like that just doesn't feel right to me at all. I mean, of
Mm-hmm.
course there's trauma and stuff that I later on could sort of uncover, but it was all something that was, but it's just, there's so many people out there who get excited about this kind of work because it's an alternate path. And I know that for me, in my excitement when I started, whether I was training with people or, reading stuff or watching stuff, devouring all this information about spirituality in general, and started kind of going through a process of like shedding friends around me,
Mm-hmm.
which was ultimately a good thing.
It happens.
But I remember being very like excited about it. Like, I'm going to be able to talk to spirit, and people being like, oh yeah, she's definitely
Fucking
lost it.
weirdo.
Yeah. So, and realizing that, I got so excited about it in the beginning, and I kind of told everybody, just kind of handing over that power. Here you go. Feel free to judge me. Please judge me. Like, it was almost like that's kind of what I was doing, but kind of going through that process, seeing how people responded to it, seeing how pushed away it was. And now looking at kind of what happened with QAnon and all that stuff, how these people who don't understand this idea of being discerning, like something doesn't feel right to me here, but just going along with something just because it appeals to their wounding, and like not being brave enough to actually like look at their wounding.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really making any sense, but
Totally
yeah,
making sense. I mean,
yeah,
it's all it's I wrote a whole blog post about the psychological profiles of the types of people that are drawn into QAnon, and all of it just culminates into one big massive spiritual bypass.
yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Which part?
So, first, spiritual bypassing. I've mentioned it once here before, and you've also written something interesting about when is it bypassing versus making boundaries.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, spiritual bypassing is when we use spiritual concepts to justify not looking at our wounds and not doing shadow work, or we justify sort of a form of spiritual narcissism where we believe that we are more enlightened than the rest of the world and other people. And then spiritual bypassing, when it's projected, becomes spiritual gaslighting. And you use those same spiritual concepts that you're using to bypass on your own to gaslight other people and tell them that they shouldn't be doing XYZ either, which then in turn feeds your own ego and makes you feel more important, which makes you feel more enlightened than thou.
Yeah. Damn. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like, how do you feel when you see all these people, like these teachers and stuff? Are you calling everybody out?
Um, I mean, there are certain people that I do feel like absolutely need to be called out just for
Yeah.
the sheer volume of their audience.
Mm.
They're so popular, and I mean, I've been attacked by JP Sears people.
Oh my
uh,
God.
the holistic psychologist is another one that has done some not kosher things, and she's got 3 million
Jesus.
followers on Instagram. So there are certain people who have such a mass audience that they can't just be allowed to have power unchecked.
Yeah.
For others, it's not so much about, I mean, and it all depends on like what this person has done as well. If it's just like in general they're not as enlightened as they think they are, it's whatever. That applies to like hundreds of spiritual influencers out there. I've written entire posts like how to identify a spiritually immature wellness influencer.
Yeah.
And it really just boils down to emotional maturity. Is this person just using the words, the buzzwords, and they are still acting like a 14-year-old online? They might not be as enlightened as they think they are.
Yeah.
So it kind of depends on who it is and what they're doing. But I want to give people handlebars about how to understand this stuff. Like I've written other posts on how to tell if a spiritual teacher is credible. If somebody's credible, they're going to have integrity. They're going to have a grounded sense of spirituality. They're not going to believe in this concept of good and evil. They're going to practice non-dualism. They're going to be authentic, and I don't mean like the fake sort of social media authentic. I mean genuinely authentic.
Wait, there's got to be a phrase for that. The social media authenticity, in quotes.
I don't even know.
God, what could that be? But I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. Just want to share my story.
Yeah. I'm just sharing my story so I can get your sympathy, because I'm actually a covert narcissist.
Yeah. And I need your energy because
Right.
I can't generate my own.
So, trying to give people these guidelines of how to be more discerning with spirituality, because that's the thing. When you are new to spirituality, you are in a state where it's like, holy shit, everything I thought I knew about the world just changed.
Yeah.
And your mind is open, which is a great thing, because you're open to exploring new ideas, you're open to exploring new perspectives, new concepts. But it's like, Carl Sagan quoting the other guy, it's like, have an open mind, but not so open that your brain falls out.
Yeah.
And and a lot of people who get into spirituality are drawn to it because they're grieving because they lost a loved one, or they have some kind of mental illness and they're looking for answers, or because they've been traumatized and abused and they're looking for a path to healing. So they're in a vulnerable state. And they're coming into spirituality and they're looking to these influencers as guides, as people who can give them information. And when a lot of times those influencers themselves are not healed either. And so it becomes the blind leading the blind.
Yeah.
And that's where you get these toxic environments of spiritual abuse and just, like bubbles of mental illness, of people channeling entities, and they're probably actually DID or schizophrenic.
Yeah.
And there's no discernment there on the part of the practitioner, or the healer, or the channeler, or whatever, or the people who are drawn to them.
Yeah. I always wonder. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I mean, I think that it's interesting you mentioned channeling, because I think that was the first thing that it was like my first wormhole into this world, because I was just curious about it. And I remembered watching. Did you ever see that documentary called Tuning In?
I don't think so.
It's on YouTube, I think. It had like Bashar and all the sort of popular channelers.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember thinking, like, this is crazy. Like, these people are ridiculous. Like they're making these little, like these weird voices, and it just feels so performative. And then the more I sort of like listened to it, I was like, oh, but they're all kind of saying the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what struck me and caught me into that. And I was like, I want to be able to do that. Like I want to do that. Of course, I've practiced it and I've done things like that, and it's super fucking weird, and I don't really love the idea of doing it. Um, but like, what's your take on that? I mean, like from what I see from channelers when they are channeling beings, the way they describe it is like, this is basically an aspect of, myself. It could be me, it could be, and it's obviously coming through me because I'm a filter, so it's going to be like what my mind thinks this being should sound like, or like on a subconscious level. What's your take on that?
So there's that's a big question. Um,
We got time.
so the whole concept of being a channel, right, is to literally just like give yourself over to another entity to flow through you. And there's this concept of being a clear channel and not being a clear channel, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the more trauma and the more rigid thinking belief systems that you have, the more that information that's being channeled through you is going to get twisted and come out the other end
Yeah.
fucked up. And I see this happen all the time.
Yeah.
Because everyone is connected to spirit, literally everybody. Anybody who has any kind of, first of all, everybody has psychic abilities.
Yep.
But anyone who has developed them to any degree is doing this, that they have this filter in what's coming through them, and it's going to heavily depend on their belief system. The more healed you are, the clearer of a channel you're going to be. And this is also why the more healed you become, the more in tune with your intuition you're going to be. As you heal and as you clear that trauma, as you clear that heavy energy, you become more tapped into your intuition, which has been there the whole time.
Yeah.
It's just been buried under all of this heavy negative energy and belief systems.
Yeah.
So depending on how much shadow work a specific channeler has done is going to heavily depend on how accurate their information is going to be.
Yeah.
And again, I'm a non-dualist. I don't believe in this concept that there are negative entities and evil aliens out there funneling false light to channelers. I don't believe in demons. I don't believe in negative entity attachments. We are all one. Everything out there is an aspect of you.
Yeah.
So all this stuff that's happening behind the scenes, so to speak, with these people is really just their own trauma coming to the surface.
Yeah.
And it's usually been so repressed that it's actually like, energetically manifesting, kind of as a separate entity in their heads.
Yeah.
And I have seen this time and time again. Like I've had a couple of people reach out to me who believed they were possessed. And you start talking to them and you ask them some questions, and it's like, what's your trauma history? And it turns out, they're an alcoholic, they've got a drug addiction, they've been sexually abused, they've got all kinds of like childhood trauma that they've never looked at. I've done work on people where I have actually sensed something where I was like, this seems like what people would label a negative entity attachment, but that's not how, like, my belief system works. And then I kind of like, in the process of working on them, spirit actually shows me like, this is their own trauma. And the solution is to integrate and to love it, and to look at that and process it. Because
Yeah,
it's all
oh, sorry, go ahead. I get so
Because it's
excited.
all, it's all an aspect of self to some degree. Everything, even our guides, I look at my guides as an aspect of my higher self.
Yep.
I look at, you know, guardian angels or archangels or whatever kind of, deities people want to talk about. Like those things are aspects of a portion of a higher self as well. Those are energies, archetypal energies that exist within you and within the universe, in the collective, in everyone, that you can tap into
Yep.
and embody. And, if you want to use that definition, channel.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, it occurred to me, I was like, why do we call certain beings entities, which feels very negative and like, and then other ones beings?
Hmm.
Like the inherent sort of difference between like the separation of like, this is an entity, and then like, this is a being. And I was kind of shown that it's the same thing. It's like,
Right.
it's not, and I've definitely been trained in that language, like depossess. Like I'm actually about to do a compassionate depossession class in April, to sort of address at least earthbounds that are kind of hanging around,
Hmm.
um, which I've never thought I'd be interested in, but I was kind of running into the same thing with clients. But ultimately, what I was seeing was, or at least the way I kind of interpreted it was, like we're fractured, right? We have all this trauma, but a lot of times, and those cracks, we do have the light kind of coming in from behind it, but those cracks are kind of where that energy will attract. Like it's kind of like it's like an open wound to something that like eats blood or whatever. A little different, but that's kind of how I had been experiencing it. Um, but yeah, it's, and I've definitely I have undergone a like a depossession with somebody, where they removed something from me or whatever you want to call it. And I wasn't expecting it to be a thing or a practice where I had to channel this being. He was like, I'm going to speak to this now. But I did feel, and this was kind of scary. Like, I'm a pretty, I guess I can't even say normal person anymore, but, I'm pretty self aware person. But I all of a sudden felt this like huge weight happening. And like I felt like I weighed 400 pounds. I started sweating. My body was in a weird, almost crooked position. And I felt I was saying things to this guy that like I would never say. Like, you're an asshole. It's like, or like, you don't know what you're doing. She's mine. That kind of stuff. Like, I don't even know. And whether or not that was me or something else, the only thing that I could really, I mean, he did some work to kind, calling in the archangels or whatever. The only thing that I could really do, because I still kind of felt it over the course of the next couple of weeks, was like just call it out and like kind of make fun of it, which at that point I just felt it leave. Like I didn't feel that energy within me anymore. I don't know. I'm just wondering what your take on that kind of
Yeah.
stuff is.
So, in my understanding, and from what my approach and how my spiritual understanding of these things are, is that a lot of these things that we perceive as attachments. So there's are you familiar with Tibetan mysticism at all?
I studied Tibetan Buddhism in college, but I don't remember anything.
So there's a few different ways to look at this, but there in Tibetan mysticism, there's this concept called a tulpa. And a tulpa is there are people called tulpamancers who do this consciously. They think about with their mind and create a separate entity.
Hmm.
And this entity um is just like any other entity that you would, normally channel or whatever.
Yeah.
And they do this consciously to like create another being. Um, and then I don't know if you've ever learned much about dissociative identity disorder, which is formerly known as multiple personality disorder.
Yeah, yeah.
So from a psychological standpoint, in dissociative identity disorder, a trauma has happened at some point in the person's life that was too much, too soon, and it was so traumatic that they could not process the full experience. And their mind's way of coping with that experience is to literally fracture the ego.
Mm.
And when the ego fractures, so the ego itself, it serves as the mechanism that gives us an identity. So as a spirit, as a soul, we don't have a this is me, this is you kind of understanding. We have a we are all one thing understanding. So when we incarnate into a physical body, we develop an ego, which is our identity complex, and the ego is the mechanism through which we are able to experience that separation. And the mind is powerful, man.
Yeah.
So when a child or whomever experiences this traumatic event and their ego fractures, it creates additional identities. And those identities are able to all sort of like interact and engage through a single body, just like you would consider a channeled being.
Yeah.
And so I actually read an interview in Business Insider, of all places, where this guy had interviewed a topomancer that he met on Reddit. And this person was describing themselves and the topo they created and how they share a body and are able to like switch off and talk. And I was like, this is just DID, but he's consciously done it instead of subconsciously done it.
Yeah.
And so, and even DID itself, like from a spiritual perspective, psychology knows only what psychology knows, right?
Yeah.
So they're looking at how something is presenting externally with a person, and they're looking for similarities between people. And then they're going to create, sort of a profile about that and say, okay, well, this is how we diagnose this. From a spiritual standpoint, it could be different things happening that present the same externally. So from a spiritual standpoint, it could be that this person experienced the trauma and they, sort of shattered their ego and created multiple identities. I think from a spiritual standpoint, it could also be that that person is tapped into their multidimensional self more so than other people. And they are able to experience future and past and concurrent lives through one consciousness. I have a friend who has DID, and she and I have talked about this a lot because she's just been trying to figure it out, her whole life too. And she's like, one of my others does feel like a future self, and one of my others definitely feels like somebody who lived like 400 years ago. So it's just really interesting, like how multifaceted it all is. But so rounding this all back to
No, I'm like, God, I'm like so excited to hear someone else talk.
so rounding this all back to your question, I have also come to see some of these things that people experience as possession or negative entity attachments as being soul fragments from past lives, or rather concurrent lives, because there's no time.
There's no time. Yep.
And it's them sort of, having that energetic tether to this other life where something really traumatic and terrible happened. And when that piece of their soul died, that trauma energy, that heavy energy, stayed here on earth. So you might look at that soul fragment as being an earthbound spirit from another lifetime that is attached to your current incarnation.
See, that makes sense to me.
Right.
Like that really makes sense to
Rather
me.
than there being these like random weirdo evil spirits floating around just attacking people at random,
Yeah. Yeah.
it all gets pulled back into your multidimensional self.
Everyone has a personal guidance system and you can tap into your own. And for me, the way I kind of describe it to other people, it's like it's your guides, it's the universe, it's your body, it's your higher self, it's your lives, your ancestors, whatever it is, whatever wisdom you're getting, it's just coming, it's you. I mean, you're the stereo speaker, like it's all coming in through you.
Yep.
And it's going to be affected by you and how you feel. And it's like it just felt so much easier to kind of refer to it like that, because it was like, okay, I'm just telling people, like, I'm tapping into your PGS, like your personal guidance system, because I'll tap into people's energy before I give them a reading, and I'm like, I'm seeing you do this, and they're like, oh, that's because I'm literally going to go do that next week. Like, I have a plan. Like, did someone tell you that? I'm like, no. And then I'm like, well, that's not their guide telling me. Like, maybe I'm tapping into their energy field and getting like their thoughts or something. And I was like, well, I think that's why I like to call it a personal guidance system, because it's like, it's all that stuff. It's just all as one. It doesn't really matter like
Yep.
who you're talking to, unless they want to come in and be like, I am this, and this is what, how I connect to this person. I'm a future self or whatever. But yeah, I always found that the specifics, especially by the time people find me and want to talk to me about their spiritual stuff, is what trips everybody up, because everyone wants to see their guide, everyone wants to know they have like an angel, they want to be able to know who they are, what name to call them. And again, I just don't happen to be that kind of a psychic person who can see all that stuff. For me, it's more of a feeling, and then I can hear. But it's also because I go in with a very strong intention of like, I only want to hear information that's going to help them. Like, I only want energy here that is for this person's highest good. I want it to be like a productive thing. I'm not going to be like, you're going to split with your boyfriend in August,
Yeah.
like that's not that's not my style. But and I also try to explain to people, like, you can't, like, your timeline shifts like like nanoseconds, like you're constantly shifting, and there's no way to know like what your future is, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. Unless you're like putting forth some serious manifestation juju to try to like,
Yeah.
hone in on that timeline.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because everyone has the secret on how to manipulate that stuff and wants to sell it to you. Or at least that's what I'm finding. But this has been super.
Surprise, the secret is to just let go.
What'd you say?
Surprise, the secret is to just let go.
I know. We'll talk about that a little.
I mean, what you oh, I always tell people my approach to manifestation, I am the Ron Popeil of manifestation. Set it and forget it.
Yeah. Ooh. I like that.
And, figure out what you want, but you can't like cling to that.
Yeah.
And you choke the life out of it when you cling to it and you need it and you've got to have it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so it's just like, this is what I want. I trust
It's
the
like,
universe to bring this to me. Cool.
yeah.
Moving on.
I mean, no, it's like throwing a rock into the ocean. It's like it's probably gonna sink. Like, when you're holding on, that you're adding weight to something, it's literally not gonna go where you expect it to go. It's just gonna drop down. But
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that also kind of occurred to me, everyone talks about manifestation all the time. It's like, why don't you look back in your life and see what you manifested, probably unknowingly?
Right.
Because it's like we
That's
think of
that's the
like,
other thing.
yeah,
You've got to realize that your ability to manifest is only as good as A, what you're trying to manifest and whether or not that's in alignment
yeah,
with your highest good.
yeah,
And two, your unchecked beliefs about your worthiness.
yeah, yeah. But
And
and
then
it's
I see a lot of people come into spirituality and they're like, I want to manifest money and I'm going to
yeah,
manifest success. And it's like, if you were truly healed, would you need those things?
yeah, yeah. I want a new car.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm kind of like, well, why don't you think about how you manifested that shitty job? And like
Right.
think about and that because that's manifestation too. Of course, it's not the kind of manifestation you actually wanted, but you manifested that. So look back at all the shitty stuff and remember that that's just as much manifestation as the shiny new like mansion that you're that's on your vision board. It's like why don't you look at that shitty job that you manifested, you know, all the signs were right, and like trace that one back, figure out how did you bring that into your life and why did that come into your life?
Yeah.
You know?
I do want to, when I talk about manifestation though, like I always want to make it clear, because these kinds of thoughts and ideas, when it comes to people who've been in abusive relationships or
Mm.
been abused at all, to like tell those people that they've manifested these experiences may
Oh
be
yeah.
incredibly damaging.
Yeah.
And I always tell people abuse is generational trauma handed down from one person to another person. That's karma. I don't view karma as this thing that, oh, I did this wrong thing in this past life, so I've got to come back in this life and then experience this so that I balance it out. Karma to me is the energetic imprint we leave behind on earth. The
Mm.
consequences of our actions and reactions, positive or negative, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The negative stuff that we leave behind, the unhealed stuff, the things that we do to other people, how we contribute to society is what we come back to experience.
Mm.
All of the stuff that happened throughout the history of the world, all of those people's traumas, those actions, those reactions, the societies they built out of that trauma is what has guided and created the world we live in today. So when we incarnate back into this timeline, we're experiencing the consequences of people's actions from the past.
Yeah.
And that includes generational trauma and abuse.
Yeah.
So the whole goal of us coming back here over and over again is to clear that.
Yeah.
And it's to heal it and to stop that cycle so that we can build a world where people don't have to hurt anymore.
Yeah.
And that's not your fault that somebody else did a thing to you.
Yeah.
That's just the world that was built.
Yeah.
And
Louder
so,
for the people in the back.
I've kind of been pounding this message, but we live in an abusive society. We live in a society that has normalized abuse. And once we recognize that, we can start to heal it.
Yeah.
But so for anybody who thinks that they manifested their abusive partner,
Mm.
that's not true.
Yeah.
Like manifested in a very, very general way, in the sense that collectively we've manifested an abusive society. Okay, maybe. But you specifically did not draw that experience to you. You just incarnated here on earth in a shithole.
Yeah. 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 And it's yeah, you did not ask to be the victim and to endure that kind of suffering. Yeah. I love how you basically applied your perspective towards trauma related um, behaviors and abuse and sort of how the spiritual world really kind of just latches onto that and contributes to that sort of cycle of sort of victim blaming and you know
Mm-hmm.
like how did I bring that in towards me? I think then I'll kind of go back and say it's like it's not about what you're bringing in and asking for. It's about where does that wounding, how can that wounding just be transformed? Where can you find the energy to really move that into a space of compassion for yourself.
Right. And so when people want to understand, well, how do I keep having these experiences over and over again? It's, well, okay. So you incarnated here into an abusive society. That abusive society gave you abusive programming, and then you're operating from that abusive programming. That's why you're ending up with the same patterns in your relationships over and over. So you've got to work on that programming and deprogram that. And then once you've done that, you're going to be able to identify healthier partners.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of this in spirituality, this whole like, I am the supreme manifester of my entire life, comes from in Western spirituality. This is a concept that is unique to Western spirituality. We have this very, very heavy emphasis on self. And that is Western society in general, especially America.
Yeah.
We are very individualistic. We apply individualism as a social theory that says pull yourself up by the bootstraps.
Yeah.
You are, the sole person responsible for yourself. And when you apply that sort of thinking to spirituality, it becomes spiritual narcissism.
Yeah.
Sorry, someone's texting.
That's okay. That's okay. It's so funny because as you were talking, one of the things that also kind of popped up for me was like this idea of this heroism, like we have all these, like our myths, our archetypes are like these Superman, Wonder Woman kind of archetypes, and we keep perpetuating it.
I keep having this conversation with my boyfriend all the time, and literally anybody who will listen to me, because I'm a comic book nerd. But
this is why I'm putting you on. This is why you're here.
I love DC Comics. I
Yeah.
love DC Comics characters. They have depth. They have pain. They have anguish. They are, a multifaceted character. And then you've got Wonder Woman and Superman, who are one-dimensional, only good. And that's the thing that just doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
And that's why I love Marvel and what Marvel's done. I think did I mess that up? Did I say
that? It's like, I know. The only reason I know is because my family is, my family is very like, we are a Marvel family. I'm like, okay, I guess so. But go ahead.
But yeah, I love Marvel comics. Characters are multi-dimensional, and a lot of the heroes from DC Comics are just 100% good guy.
Yep.
Don't experience any pain.
Yeah.
Don't know what it's like to be a bad person. And it's just not attractive to me. I like shadows. Give me the dark and hero any day.
Yeah. 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 The way our society is set up is just, yeah. And that inherent sort of punitive expectation, if you're not abiding by the cultural rules that we've all been programmed with. And then internalizing that and punishing ourselves for not living up to that shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I feel like that's what causes the most suffering in this country, especially, is this programming.
How much of that I've got to be a hero mentality results in martyrdom and self-sacrifice or striving for impossible perfection.
Yeah. And now with social media, let's show you where to aspire to. Let's make this all like, yeah, it blows my mind, the narcissism that's celebrated on social media. I think I mean, again, it's labels, but I was born in the mid 70s. People would call that Generation X, and obviously did not grow up with social media. We had like AOL when I was in college, but that's about it. But this sort of God, converting a human being into like a brand, you know, and this further separation from soul. Um, and it's just so normalized. Of course of course it's an abusive world. Yeah. It just makes this like I've never heard it phrased that way, but it's
And
true.
even the people who are trying to be the sort of like anti-perfect are still
Yeah.
making
That's my
themselves
brand.
into a brand.
Yep, that's your brand. I'm anti-brand. Yeah.
And like, I mean, I guess I have a background in branding too. And I love graphic design and things like that. So I know when people think of sort of like, spirituality and fuck off and pink, like they think of me.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
But that's also just me.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I know. I love it. I do love I'm the same way. Like I love beauty. I have an appreciation for beauty, not for standard beauty or what's, prescribed beauty. For me it's just everyone recognizes beauty, whether it's visually, coming from a person's soul, what have you, nature. And for me, I love graphic design too. I mean, I worked for advertising companies for a long time. Super familiar with those worlds and the ins and outs of it. But yeah, it's like it's one thing to sort of do something because you enjoy the creation of it, not because you have to or it's on brand.
Right.
And I definitely falter into that a little with I don't know if I want to post that because it's not my brand. And then like I'll kind of like shove my finger in my face and be like, okay, you can fucking post that and not be a dick. Like so I mean I definitely come up against this a lot in my own sort of experience because it's like social media I've been kind of grunting and groaning about for so long, and I'm just at this point where I'm like, all right, everyone's like, well, it's just what it is and it's everybody's doing it and it's just kind of what it and how you have to. And I'm like, all right, fine. I think what I had to do was just kind of like pull back the meaning I assigned it. And once I was able to kind of do that, but yeah, it comes back to like belief systems. Like, do I believe that my life and my success is determined through Instagram? If I believe that, and then I didn't know that I held that belief, but I was acting from a place of that probably like mid last year. But then it's like, okay, well now I can look at that and be like, okay, I didn't realize I had that belief.
Yeah.
Now all I have to do is just be like, all right, I don't hold that belief. Do I really want that? No. It's almost like what was the Tibetan? It's like creating that sort of thought form in its
Tulpa.
own, yeah. Yeah. But yeah, the mind is a very powerful thing.
Yeah. Like my whole so I use a branding process for literally everything. Like the whole like let's go and figure out our core values.
Yeah.
That's what I've been doing in my mentorship group actually.
Mm.
Because I figured out that I could apply that to my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And once I figured out what my core values were, it was like, oh, okay, I can make better decisions about my life now because I know what's important to me.
Yeah.
And I apply that same thing to like how I think about social media. And it's like I want to be in integrity. I want to be authentic. And like I don't care about how many people I reach. I care about the quality of the people that I reach.
Yeah.
So that can be 10 fucking people if that's
Yeah.
all it is. And
Yeah.
that is good for me.
Yeah.
That makes me happy. I don't want a bunch of people who put me on a pedestal and are like fighting with other people who are disagreeing with me. And like, I don't need you to defend me. And like,
Yeah.
yeah, this is the whole way that a lot of people approach marketing, especially in spirituality. Marketing itself is anti-spiritual.
Yeah.
Like you can't, capitalism and spirituality don't go together.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, they don't.
Oh, thank you for saying that.
And you know, the entire premise of marketing and advertising and PR is that I'm going to figure out what, you know, your insecurities are and how to trigger those to get
Yep.
you to buy from me.
Yes. Can you say that one more time so people really understand that everything they see is designed to trigger them and their lower emotions?
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean,
That's what we learned in I went to school for TV production and we had marketing classes and that's what we learned.
yeah, that's it.
Yep.
That's Edward Bernays is the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and he worked in the US's propaganda department and in World War II. And what he learned there in psychological warfare, he took and founded the first PR firm. He was a propagandist, and he started using that with marketing and advertising for corporations.
Yep.
This is the foundation of marketing. This is the foundation of capitalism.
Yeah.
Um, so when you see all these, you know, spiritual influences out there writing their sales copy and their calls to action and their for their $5,000 weekend retreats, I've said many times, like if anybody in my social media audience ever sees me post a photo of myself holding a bundle of sage or frolicking through a woodland forest or doing a yoga pose, you have my permission to throat punch me.
Oh God, Ash, you're speaking my language. My God. I know you won't go on Clubhouse, but God, you're so needed.
For me to get up on this platform and just start telling people to fuck off.
Oh God, it would just be, oh, there's
And
such
you
a
can
need
fuck
for it.
off. And you can fuck off. And you can fuck off.
What'd you say?
There's a website called the New Age Bullshit Generator, and you just go and you click a button, and it will like throw a bunch of New Age buzzwords together into a perfectly constructed paragraph. And I have actually tested this out on social media where I've just posted things from this New Age Bullshit Generator, and people will like it and share it like crazy.
Oh, you're just dropping gems. Bullshit. I'm just like typing this in because now I'm like, I have to. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. This is amazing. I
I
mean,
know I'm a shy person, but I love social experiments and I like to talk with people. There's a whole, like, I mean, we could do an entire episode on narcissistic spirituality anyway.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there's a lot of like, I posted something to my Facebook group or even to my Instagram stories the other day, and I was like, destroy the myth of the empath narcissist connection in one sentence. And it was like, one of the things that I said was like, a good chunk of the people out there who claim to be empaths are actually covert narcissists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think codependency and narcissism is the same thing on opposite ends of the spectrum.
It is.
Yeah.
They're both a lack of boundaries.
Yep.
They both feed off of relationships.
Yep.
It's just that one person gives their boundaries away and the other person takes them.
Yep. I mean,
that's why they're attracted to each other.
Yeah. I mean, my mom was a narcissist and I was codependent. And it's really fucking confusing as a kid. And I absolutely see narcissistic tendencies in myself because of it. I feel like that's the result of that trauma.
Here's the other thing though. Everybody has narcissistic tendencies.
Yeah,
like,
true.
Literally everybody.
Yeah.
And it matters like how high on that scale you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
true.
Some people, you know, we all have them, and to some degree they can be like a survival mechanism.
Yeah.
But it's when you have a lot of them, and usually that comes from attachment trauma.
Yeah.
You build them up because narcissistic parents do create codependent children.
Yeah.
But when you don't analyze them and you don't do anything about them and you maintain them throughout a lifetime, you then become the abuser.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, I know. There's a lot of, I feel a lot of, and that's the other thing about kind of, I mean, that's the other thing about being an empath. Everyone is an empath, just in different degrees,
Right.
you know. Yeah, but the labels, yeah, I love what you write on your website about the labels. It's like,
Everybody loves
I don't like to label
the
myself.
labels, man.
What'd you say?
I said everybody loves the labels, man.
They do. They do. Sense of control in an uncontrollable world. But Ash, this was so wonderful. God, there's just so much wonderful knowledge that I'm so happy that you shared that. And I'm really happy that our listeners are getting to hear just everything in your perspective. Is to me, it's like I'm always like, yep, bullseye. Yep. Every time I read anything, I'm just like, and I also want to thank my friend Samantha Cagman, who introduced me to your Instagram page. So for anyone listening, you can find her at Ash Rising on Instagram. And I'll leave some of your information for your website in mysacredspace.com in the show notes. But just to wrap up, I just want to thank you so much for giving me an hour and a half of your time. And yeah, it's just been
You're
so,
welcome.
yeah.
Nice to be in orbit.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking around and listening all the way through. Um, Hopefully you broke it down into parts. There's a lot of information going on in there. There's a lot more information that can be found at Ash Riley's website, which, again, I've mentioned this a couple of times, in mysacredspace.com. It's really a very thorough resource for anyone just getting into spirituality for themselves or just through curiosity. So I highly urge you to read her blog posts. Again, that's her gift. She's got a beautiful mind and an amazing way to put information. And I feel like it's really useful and really needed out there. See what resonates for you. Figure out what you agree with, what you don't agree with. You've got to encourage all of the parts of yourself to listen so that eventually they can be heard. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you next week.